Welcome to the Trade Up Podcast, Episode 3. It's the mission of this podcast and our book, Trade Up, for young people to consider a skilled trade as a career for a life with more opportunity and less debt. Coming up, John Finan of Finan Home Service in London and I talk about some of the hot topics in skilled trades, including why completion rates are low in the trades and at university. Alberta's push to poach journey people from other provinces, including Ontario, and the business and life lessons we learned from our fathers. I'm Lisa Brandt, here with John Finan on the Trade Up Podcast. Okay, John, so registration for skilled trade certifications are the highest they've been in 10 years, but there's still a lot of challenges to people becoming certified, and I'm wondering what those are. I mean, some of it is, I'm hearing from some people that there's not enough places to be an apprentice, but what do you know?
Yeah, for sure that's an issue, not enough apprenticeship places, but that's a double-edged sword. So when you're not on the team, the barrier is getting onto the team. But once you're on the team, you don't want anybody else on the team because that means somebody else has to leave. So think of an apprenticeship kind of that way. And the way it typically would go is there will be, I would gather if we looked at apprenticeship enrollments over, say, 70 years, if there even was apprenticeship 70 years ago, you would see this fluctuation. There's more, there's less, there's more, there's less. And I bet they somewhat mirror the economy in the construction industry. So, for instance, in 2007, one of my good friends is a professor at the business school in Toronto, and that's right around the time that there started to be more women going to university than men going to university. And I said, did they know why? And he said, one of the reasons they suspected this was happening is that young men could jump out of high school and go right out west and start making six figures immediately. And so a percentage would say, hey, why would I go to university for 4 years when I'm going to have to pay money? My job prospects are not guaranteed. But now I can just basically get on a plane and the companies will put me up and I'll make six figures. I'll come back in 4 years with, maybe $250,000 saved up or something if they don't waste it in the work camps that they go to.
So you're talking about the oil sands or?
The oil sands, that's right.
The oil industry, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's right. Yeah, exactly. So, and I'm saying 2007, it might have been a little bit earlier than that happened. But, at the double cohort in Ontario where there were more high school students graduating than typical, obviously university placements were tougher to get into. And, some people were saying, well, I basically won a free year. I would have had to go for 13 years of school. Now I only have to go to 12. So let's consider my 18th year or my grade 13 years a free year. I just take off and do something. And, oh, by the way, they're hiring in the tar sands and I can go out there and make more money than my mom and dad ever made in their lifetime. Great, gone. And maybe that stuck. Maybe they became tradespeople, that kind of thing. And then conversely, in, say, 2008 or 9, when we had the real crash, a lot of factories slowed down, shut down, laid people off. The government sets a ton of training money, typically federally, for people to retrain to get into new occupations. And the trades became the low-hanging fruit of the day. So, for the next couple of years, there was a real larger number than usual of specifically gas fitters because that trade was a little bit easier to get into. You could pay $20,000, go to school for 6 months, and you were licensed. So there were a ton of people that were in their 30s, 40s, and 50s that did that. And it frankly flooded the market. So I'm not surprised that trades applications go up and down as the economy goes up and down, but so does the job market. So many of them will just find out the job that they thought was there isn't really there.
Right. And that's what concerns me because, of course, part of what we're doing is trying to remind people about the trades as an option. And there's been a lot of incentivization from the governments. They are trying to lure people into trades. But if you can't get an apprenticeship, there's going to be so many people retiring. So is that going to be another wave in the future?
It will be. But interestingly, I hear these figures are saying 100,000 tradespeople are going to retire in the next, or there's going to be 100,000 jobs and 20% of the workforce is going to retire in the next 10 years. That might be true of the entire economy. I don't know. But what is true is that 40-year-old journey person in 10 years is going to be 50. So are they going to want to be climbing the ladder, lifting the thing, digging the hole, welding the whatever, as much as they did when they were 40. No, they're not, because their company is typically grown or changed. So there's now management positions for them to move into. So, we think you become a plumber at age 22 and you be a plumber until you're 65. That's not normally that's pretty unusual that somebody's on the tools for their entire career. They're usually moving up in the organization. I say up, they're moving into a different role. And that would be, maybe it's estimating projects, maybe it's managing projects, maybe it's being the site supervisor. The school boards are looking for tradespeople to get into the classroom and teach as well. So there's unlimited number of options for a person to move into once they've got their qualifications.
Well, we can take you as an example. I mean, you're an electrician, but you have your own company and it's expanded well beyond electricity. As you say, not on the tools anymore. I mean, you certainly could be if you wanted to, but now you're just the king with the scepter on the throne running your own company and you have no problems and life is just perfect. Isn't that how it is?
Well, that's a whole different podcast, that one right there it is. But I will say this, that one of the things that I've always, I should say always not, I didn't realize this when I started. I thought, John, you become an electrician, start a company. If things go well, you'll be what you have turned into 30 years later. That's worked out fine for me. But the reality was it wasn't likely to happen. Even as a young person, I knew that the chances that it's going to go well are not good. And the chances that I'm going to fail in business are much greater than I will succeed. So that's why the trades were attractive to me, because I knew that at the end of that journey, if it didn't work out, I had a trade to keep myself going and feed my family, which I didn't have at that point, but I knew at some point I would have one, and I figured they'd probably want to eat every day too. So I knew that was the backstop. So one of the reasons that I like the trade for young people, aside from the fact that they can do a university or college degree without amassing debt and taking 4 years of some of their prime learning and earning years off, is that they can do school part-time. And it's not unusual. I think the college that's just up the street from me has got, if you added up the total count, I think they'd say something like we have 40,000 students. Well, there isn't 40,000 students on the campus. There's night courses, there's online courses, and I don't know what percentage, but it's substantial, that are people that are in their careers already that are just either retraining for something else or continuing the education of what they're already doing. And that's what you should do anyway. So the thought that you become a tradesperson and stop learning isn't a good one. I mean, I don't want those people working at our company. I don't think anybody else does either.
Right. So you were always going to be a business owner?
From the earliest days, I think I was 12 or 13. My dad had started a business. That didn't end well for him. So I got firsthand account of how things can go bad. And he had health issues, which, I think he started a business when maybe I was 12, and the poor guy was dead by the time I was 14, and he wasn't even 50. So it wasn't what killed him. It was, other things, but it just didn't end up well. And that easily could have been my story too, because it's the story of most people that start a business.
My dad started his own business. He worked for the railroad for 18 years, CN. And then he started his own business taking down the trestles, taking up railway tracks that were being decommissioned. And he was, if not the first, one of the first to do it in Canada, apart from the railroad. And so my family, apart from me, I didn't stick with the company, but they lived all over the country and they would hire locally and they would do all sorts of stuff. But I did see the worry and responsibility that he had as a business owner. For example, there was some great danger there. One of his friends who worked for him didn't listen to how he was supposed to cut the metal from a high tower, and he started taking shortcuts and was killed.
Oh.
And the only reason my dad wasn't held responsible was because people in the local coffee shop remembered overhearing him telling this employee over and over to make sure his safety harness was belted, to make sure to cut no more than 4-foot pieces. And I mean, that's a pretty dramatic example, but as a business owner, that kind of stuff rests on your shoulders. The safety, all of those things of your employees. There's a lot of responsibility.
Absolutely, that's true, and it's something I would say that you grow into. Like, we have over 30 staff, so the nights of me not being able to sleep because I'm not sure where payroll is going to come from next week are kind of gone. Not that that isn't sometimes a problem. It's just that, hey, I've been doing it for, let's see, 30 years, 1,500 payrolls I've had to deal with. So, maybe the first 300 I didn't sleep for all that well. But after that, you kind of just get used to it. And I think the responsibility is that same thing. You're just kind of on autopilot in terms of how you think about things. It's like, well, this is something that we have to always be vigilant for, as we do for many things. I mean, no
But
matter
what
what you're
about
doing.
government regulations, for example? Have you been affected by that kind of thing over the years where suddenly something's different and you have to spend the money and take care of it?
Yeah, and it's constantly changing. I'll give you an example, and this wasn't government regulation, but this is how I started to look at it when it reframed. So I'm a 2-3 man operation. We're doing the electrical wiring on brand new houses, and the framing would get done, and the electrician typically would be the third trade in. The ductwork, the sheet metal guys would come in first because their equipment is the biggest and they take up the most room, and it's easier for the wires to move around ductwork than it is ductwork to move around wires. So they go first, plumber goes second, electrician goes third. So typically what would happen is we would get in there as early as we could. And oftentimes the stairs were not in. So picture a raised ranch or a 2-story house. You would be climbing up a ladder to get between floors, or in the case of a raised ranch, it's maybe a 5-foot drop down to the basement. You might just sort of sit on your butt and drop down. And one of the electrical inspectors came along, and he needed to inspect the electrical panel. And he had to get down to the basement, and there was no stairs. And he said, "John, I'm not going down." He said, "You've got to have stairs for me." And I remember and I knew him well enough to have that conversation that, was maybe a little bit confrontational. And of course I was younger, and, that seemed to be the way you handled problems when you were younger. And he said, "Don't call me unless the stairs are in again. And, oh, by the way, if the stairs are in for me, they're in for you. You're not climbing a ladder." And I wasn't thinking about safety, that part, I was still a little bit I wasn't young. I was maybe 30, but I wasn't thinking about the safety. Once I told the builder, "Hey, look, we can't do this until the stairs are in because that hydro inspector is not going to go down to the basement." Stairs were in, like, every time. And guess what? I didn't have to climb up and down ladders. My job went faster. It was safer. My staff had no issues climbing ladders before, but it was a lot better for everybody. And I sort of think about regulations that way as well. Oftentimes the government will do, I would say every time they're probably doing this, but better at it than sometimes, they would do industry consultations. So, okay, if we need something changed, is the manufacturing side of the industry okay with this? Is the contracting side okay with this? What other problems are we going to create? And then they build the legislation around that. So generally speaking, there are more rules constantly, but, they're typically going to make it better for everybody. And then quite selfishly, I look at it and I say to myself, well, why would I fight something that makes it harder for my competitors to start businesses and get into my industry? There's a number of things that we do that are so complicated that I don't think 25-year-old John Finan could have figured it out. That means the next guy trying to start a business is going to have challenges as well. Probably not a nice, friendly way to think about it. But as a person that has to compete with, hundreds of contractors in our area, I want it to be as difficult for everybody as it possibly can be, because I know after 30 years, I probably learned how to navigate some of those potholes better than the average person.
Right. And they're thinking the same thing. They'd like it to be difficult for you. That's competition, right?
That's right.
So,
Exactly.
yeah. And it's amazing how, since becoming acquainted with your company, I look around and I will see, oh, they do that. It's something I would
Right.
never, it's like driving a Volkswagen and suddenly you see Volkswagens everywhere or
Yeah.
whatever. Suddenly I'm seeing these companies that I've never seen before.
And, of course, we deal with the economic side of it as well, which you cannot legislate for. I mean, there's going to be good times. There's going to be bad times. There's a shift right now to get away from single family residential subdivisions. Like the 150 by 30 foot lot that everybody aspired to is probably already there. They're not making any more of them. So if you want to buy a place in towns that typically would have those subdivisions, they're going to have less of them. And they're going to be so much more money that you're going to be living in an apartment building and getting used to it. So, I was listening to somebody talk the other day. They'd gone to a university in Canada and they lived the dorm life as a student in a small apartment. And their first job was in Europe. And when he got there, the first thing he realized is, hey, wait a second, I'm still in the same size apartment as I was when I was a college student. 2 years later, when he was done, He said, this is wonderful. I don't have to have a car because I'm in a city that's got great transportation. I have all the furniture I need, which frankly isn't that much compared to what his parents would have had at their house. And he had zero interest in moving into, a 30 by 150 lot and filling it up and having grass to cut and all these other snow to shovel. He said, no, this is not what I want for my life. So I think as a group of people, the younger generation are going to adapt to this much better than we would have thought.
It's funny because what you're talking about is what my age group is aspiring to now, having gone through having the big lot or whatever. And I had a house in Toronto for a while that was ridiculous. And then we were out on 1 acre and we found as time went on, that's not what we want. But well, you have to adapt. In Europe, isn't renting a lot more common, not purchasing something anyway? I mean, I've always been ready to move into an apartment and rent if I have to. I've always had that. I'm the kind of person that if I had been on the Titanic, I would have counted the number of lifeboats for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, the good thing about our cities is you can live whichever way you want. There's big houses. If you want to live in a big house, you have to do what's required to get there, but you don't have to. You can live in much more modest accommodations as well and be quite happy.
So we talked a little bit earlier about going out to Alberta and the oil patch, the oil sands or whatever. And Alberta right now is offering a $5,000 tax rebate to any tradesperson from anywhere else in Canada who moves there. And they've capped it at 2,000 people. But now this strikes me as not solving the problem. It's just solving Alberta's problem. But, our premier's been asked if he's concerned that we're going to lose people from Ontario. So should we be looking at this like a Canadian issue, filling the skills gap in trades, or is it every province for themselves?
Well, for sure, it's every province for themselves. We didn't hire the Premier of Ontario to look after PEI or Alberta. So, their job is really to look after what's going on here. But at the end of the day, I have to say, and you said a tax credit. Is it tax credit or is it a check?
No, it's a tax rebate, actually. Rebate. You're probably, you will end up with money.
Yeah. So I'm assuming what that means is you need to spend a year in that province working. You know what? My feeling is, even as a young person, that wouldn't have been enough money to make me move to a place that I wasn't already going to move to. I would take, if I'm going to Alberta and you got this, hey, sign me up twice. I'd like that money. But it's not enough money to make me move and stay there for a year if it's not the right place. And it's nothing for the province. I mean, if I was thinking about sitting in the cabinet room and we got this $5,000 tax credit idea, what do you think? Is it going to cost a lot of money? No, because that person's going to be producing in our province and earning wages and paying taxes, and $5,000 is a pittance. It's much like what the government already does, which is, pay me $10,000 and I'll give you $5,000 back in April and you'll feel good about me. I mean, government's been playing that game for 100 years and it seems to be working. So why wouldn't they continue to do it? And it certainly makes contractors in those areas feel like, oh gosh, the government's got my back. They're really helping us. And it's not going to make much difference at all.
Okay.
To put a fine point on it, we have at our company, it sounds crazy, but we have a $5,000 bonus that we'll pay to a current staff member if they can recruit a journey person to come to our company.
Yeah.
You know what? And frankly, it's self-serving because it's got caveats. The caveat is that person has to, we'll pay it out over a period of time, and that person has to be here that entire time. They can't show up on the first day and I hand you $5,000. And conversely, you can't leave for that period of time. So it's called the golden handcuffs. And in my mind, it's an ethical bribe. If you like being here and you like your friends you have to work here, great. Let's all profit from that. Our customers are better served. The company's better served. You're better served. And now your friend's got a job at a place that, at least a job and probably a place that they want to work at. So, I think there's nothing wrong with that. We pitched the idea. It seemed crazy at first. And then when we explained it, it was like, yeah, everybody wins. And if you've got a system where everybody wins, I think it's a great thing.
Right. And then it goes back to finding good people. And how do you go about that? I mean, that's a terrific idea, because then you've already got somebody it's almost like a built-in reference, right?
Yes,
if they're bringing them, and you're not putting an ad on Indeed or whatever and having to interview, I don't know how many people. Or is the problem that there aren't that many people?
People with lots of experience and qualified, there just aren't that many. And, I think for us, it's been a while. We've already we decided, I mean, somebody comes knocking on our door that's qualified and has got the ability to do good work right off the hop, we'd be foolish not to take them. The incentives for our current employers are probably one of the ways we go about seeking those people out. But honestly, we realize and have for years that we just need to take less experienced workers, typically younger people just getting out of high school or maybe floundered in college or university for a few years, and train them. I was just recently talking to a contractor, it's a father and son that run a fairly large operation out of Vancouver. So boilers are a very niche thing. If you have a plumber, gas fitter that can work on boilers, that's a commodity that you don't want to lose. And this fellow was getting a bit older and he really wanted to be more of a mentor and a teacher. So they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. And they had something like 40 people in their company that would qualify to at least learn about boilers. I mean, their company's got more than that. But so what they said to this fellow is, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take 6 people from the field, and one day a week, let's just say it's Monday, you're going to teach them. And here's the curriculum. You know, they bought a curriculum from a trade school that would take somebody from not knowing much about boilers to being pretty much an expert. And then so one day a week, those people would be off the tools in the classroom being taught by a fellow that had 20 or 30 years of experience. And they would be paid a regular rate. So it's just a working day. It just happens to be in the classroom. And they bought actually a unit in the building they were in so that they could start this classroom and fit it up with all the stuff. So it was a massive investment for them. And then there was homework required of it. I think it was 2 to 3 hours a week that the guys needed to do. So you needed to apply, qualify for this training program within the company they worked for. And then the other 4 days, this fellow was out on job sites and he would have 4 days with each of those people. So they would have 1 day a week in class, and every 6 weeks they would have 4 days that they would go out with this fellow and work with him side by side. And it was a 6-month program. And I thought, wonderful way to train your staff, you know, retention. At the end of 6 months, they know a lot about boilers.
I guess you have to get creative sometimes. I'm going to go a little off topic here for a second, but I saw a TikTok video. Can you imagine Buddy Hackett on TikTok? Now, Buddy Hackett, for anyone who doesn't know, is a long gone comedian who was probably big in, the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, I think I remember. Maybe a little bit of a goofy fellow.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
And
Yep.
he was telling a story about his father's store getting robbed. And Buddy was just a little kid at the time. And the guy said he had a gun and he was going to rob him and take everything. And Buddy Hackett's father said, you might have a gun, you might not. You look like you could, but I'm going to take a chance that you don't. And I'm going to tell you this, if you put your gun away and your intention to rob me for the 35 cents I have, I will teach you a trade and get you out of this life.
Wow.
And Buddy says the guy came every day and he got taught to do upholstery. And I just thought that was the most fascinating story. Like, what a way. For one thing, he doesn't treat the guy like he's a piece of crap that's not worth living.
Yeah.
And he gives him something instead and teaches him how to make a living rather than going around and being a thug.
True story. Oh, that's amazing.
Huh. Isn't it amazing? Anyway, and when do you get to bring up Buddy Hackett again? They say, once you're gone, nobody remembers you. Well, Buddy Hackett, I remember Buddy Hackett.
Well, technically, we're remembering Buddy Hackett's dad, who I never even knew before, but now I've got a great story and it wasn't a TikTok thing, but when I mentioned earlier that my dad had started a business. It was a corrugated box place, so they would buy flat stock, and they had a couple of machines that would turn it into boxes for customers for smaller operations that didn't need 1 million boxes of a certain size. I don't know, it's a Friday night. I'm maybe 13 years old, and there's a knock at the door, and this, 20-ish year old guy, I'm younger, so 20-ish year old guy comes in, and my dad greets him at the door, and they go in and they sit in the kitchen and they chat. And I'm overhearing this story. And I don't think my dad was the kind of guy that brought me into these situations. Like when you have parent teacher interviews, you go and you meet the parent. He dragged me along to these ones. And the teachers are saying, well, that's not the typical way we do it. And I'm like, no, this is how I do it. And if I was having trouble with a bully at school, he would cautiously ask me what the guy's last name was, find the family's name in the phone book and call them. Let's solve this problem. I'll bring my son over and he can fight your son. Never happened, but that's the way it went. So anyway, this young man was at the kitchen table, and the way it came about was this young guy had told his mother that he had a job working at my dad's small box factory. And he didn't. He had applied, maybe was interviewed, didn't get the job, but he had told his mom, and apparently he'd gone off to work or said he was going off to work for weeks and weeks. And then when his mom I guess she found out because she called the place, she was, maybe something about the story didn't ring true. And my dad said, maybe what Buddy Hackett's dad said, here's my address, send your son over, I'll talk to him. And I don't know how it worked out for that guy. He left. Even at 12, I thought that was a pretty cool thing that he did. Yeah. Hopefully that helped that young fellow.
That's a very cool way to do it. Instead of shunning him for what he did, teach him a better way.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I love that I just love the fact that we have so many options for people. And, my brother went and worked with my dad. I took the foolish step of getting into broadcasting, all these different things that people do. I'm kidding. It was fine.
Yeah.
But all these different things that people do. And there are more ways than just getting a university degree to make a successful life.
No, absolutely. There was an article that came out a little while ago about apprenticeship completion rates. So, we think you graduate from high school, you go to university, you graduate from university, you get a job. When you think about it, everybody knows that no, not everybody does. And I think it's something like only 40% will graduate. Maybe that number's slightly different now, but it's certainly not 100%. And roughly the same is true in the trades. So looking at a stat that the completion rates were slightly different for men and women, but neither one were, terribly positive. And I suspect not much different for apprentice completion rates than university completion rates. It tracks it over the last number of years, say 10 years. And for men, it's roughly a little bit more than 50% completion rate. And for women, it's roughly around 30%. So
wow,
it isn't that much different. And I don't think you could say, oh, it's 55 for men because of these factors and 35 for women because of these factors. But the truth is we don't actually know what's behind all of that. It seems to be pretty consistent over the last 10 years that that's what it is. And if I was to take a guess as to why this is, I would say that it's, the vast majority of the apprenticeships, this will be their first real job, like the first time they've left high school, left college, and actually got something that required them to get up every morning, go to work, apply themselves, and do it day after day, week after week, year after year, which is kind of like life. But when you're just getting into it as a young person, at realizing that, oh my gosh, this isn't the promise that I thought I had for myself. The moving out of the house I thought would be wonderful requires me to pay rent, and maybe I moved in with somebody and that's not working out the way I thought a relationship would work out. So I suspect there's a lot of other factors that go into it. And to your point about starting in broadcasting, you stayed in broadcasting. That's unusual that somebody would have stayed in something the whole time because you were successful at it. It worked out fine for me doing my business, but the vast majority, that's not what happens. And they go on to something else. And at some point, hopefully they stick with a career that pays the bills, and anybody that's worked for any more than a couple of years realizes that the whole idea of get a job about doing something you're passionate about and you'll never work a day in your life, I don't think is true at all. Doesn't matter what you're doing.
I agree with you. That's a whole lot of BS.
Yeah, it is. And you have to do something that I think challenges you. You have to do something that's worthy of your time, something that you believe in. I don't know that, doing criminal activity is all that good of a career for people, or doing things that harm other people. I don't think you could feel good about it. But hey, the doctor that says, I just got into this because I wanted to help people, like there's no job that they pay you money to that you're not actually helping people. Like everything is helping people if they give you money to do it. You're picking up garbage on the street, you're helping people. The plumber trying to live in a house without plumbing, you're helping people. So do something that pays the bills the way you want to pay them and doesn't get you into the kind of debt that you can never get yourself out of.
Thanks for listening to the Trade Up podcast. If you're interested in our book, Trade Up, it's available on Amazon. Next time, George Vassallo, CEO of Canadian construction giant Bothwell Accurate. When he had trouble filling great jobs at his company, Mr. Vassallo traveled the world to learn how other countries handle education, government support, and business. He returned with lots of ideas, and he'll share them with John Finan in 2 weeks' time. If you have feedback for us or want to suggest a future topic or guest, email John at tradeupbook.ca.